Back-to-school savings are officially in session at Tanger outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne.
And I'm Liam Billingham. And I love trains.
And that's good because today's film is Narrow Margin, a.k.a.
Die Hard on a Train.
Yay!
Phil, where are you on with trains these days? Do you take them? I mean, you live in LA, so all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So, when I used to live in London and you're never off the train. You're perennially
I imagine you didn't own a car.
No, you didn't need to. I mean, it's just, the whole city is just in constant gridlock. So, no, I used to spend a lot of time trapped under the city in a sweaty tube filled with upset people with wet umbrellas. It was awesome. It's great
Upset
times.
People with wet umbrellas is a good description for
London,
British
man.
people in general.
That was my life for about 10 years. Now I'm here in a nice air-conditioned car.
You have a nice car, too.
I don't look back, really. So,
Now, me, I'm different. I'm a New Yorker. I mean, Bostonian by birth, New Yorker by adoption. And I'm a man of the people. I like the train. I like to be sweaty. I like to be losing my mind when I'm 45 minutes late to work and it's 98 degrees on May 21st. And I'm sweating onto my Free Metro newspaper. It's a very visceral memory. But I do enjoy a long-distance train ride, where you got a cabin or I've never been in a sleeper car, but you got a sleeper car. You get to go to the...
All I can think of when I think of this is, I don't know if you know the British comedian Ben Elton, but he did this amazing routine in the 80s that was all about double seat, gotta get a double seat. The mantra that goes on before they open the gates for the train to open. Double seat, double seat, gotta get a double seat.
Can I tell you this? Okay. So when I used to take the Amtrak from New York to Boston, or vice versa, by myself for holidays or whatever, I usually took the bus. But there was a period of time when I wanted the comfort of the train. I used to, so bad. I did this on the bus too. I would sit there looking with a frustrated look on my face while people were getting on, as if to imply, like, where's the person I'm going with, so people wouldn't think to sit with me. Because you want the space. You want to spread out.
Exactly. We want a man spread.
Exactly. That's exactly. I mean, it's somewhat accurate. But my favorite, I love a long distance train also because you have the cafe car. Mm-hmm. And the cafe car, with its multitude of snacks, bad sandwiches, and hopefully delicious 7-7s, plays a big part in the film that we're talking about today, which is...
Narrow Margin.
We already said that. I remember that.
Did everybody get that?
Did everybody get it? Was that good?
Did I yell it into your ears?
Look, there's a chance you haven't seen this movie. It's something of an overlooked gem.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not...
That's what I think. I mean, I was curious to know whether this was something that was culturally particularly well known in the US, or has it sort of fallen through, has it slipped through the cracks of time? In the UK, I remember this film being quite popular. It was I think it was on ITV, which is one of the main channels, like regularly. And I remember watching it as a kid and loving it, and it being like one of those movies you talk about in the playground, as something that was like a really surprising, fun, interesting movie. Of course, you can never go wrong with Gene Hackman.
The best. I remember the VHS case for this movie at the video store. I remember, it was kind of like there was a square in the middle, and Gene Hackman and Ann Archer are in the middle of it. And there's sort of like a non-detailed kind of shape around them. There's a square and then that. And I remember that really clearly, but it was one of those ones that like I kind of thought was not I didn't think it was an action movie. It was kind of like, it felt like based on the box, it was like a 90s erotic thriller or something like that. This is without the context of like reading what it was about.
Right.
But just like back in the days when you used to go to a video store and like pick a movie based sometimes just on what it looked like on the box, right? Like that was
all part of the magic of the experience.
Charm.
Was guessing what based on those images.
Yeah.
Wow, what adventure is in store for me?
And so this was actually the first time I've ever seen the movie.
Oh, okay.
I'd never seen.
Okay.
I knew of it. I knew it existed, but I'd never actually seen Narrow Margin.
Well, it's going to be an interesting discussion whether you've seen the movie, whether you've not seen the movie. We will try and avoid spoilers, or at least give you a heads up if we do. I highly recommend you check this movie out if you haven't seen it.
I watched it on Amazon Prime, which is a bad transfer, but I believe a Blu-ray came out.
That's what I was just about to say. There's an excellent Blu-ray that Kino Lorber put out a few years ago that
2020.
has Peter Hyams' commentary on it, and an excellent commentary by a film critic who is called, I believe, Peter Tanger, who talks about how he was interested in doing a book about Peter Hyams' filmography. In the end, he didn't write the book, but he sort of talks through, in a way, I think he kind of cathartically figures out his feelings about Hyams, who is a
really fascinating filmmaker.
If you look at, the totality of his filmography is really, really interesting. And there's a clear kind of pattern. And he's worked with a lot of the most iconic movie stars ever. He did a movie called Hanover Street with Harrison Ford.
I've never seen that.
I haven't seen it either. I think it's a World War II movie.
Oh.
He did a movie I love, which is a really...
End of Days.
No, Outland with Sean Connery.
Oh, that is a good movie,
which
right?
Is
Cable classic.
I think it's one of those movies, and we talked about this a little bit with films, like the comparison of films like Taken of Pelham 1, 2, 3 versus Towering Inferno, how a film can be hip and contemporary or not, even when it's like when it was made a long time ago. To me, Outland is still a very cool, hip movie.
Oh, like kind of timeless in its
just,
coolness.
There's a style. It's very stylish. Again, it feels contemporary. Great Sean Connery performance and an amazing production design. And then he also made the sequel, having the balls to do a sequel to a Kubrick movie.
Oh, he did 2010. That's pretty brave.
But actually he engaged with Kubrick and Kubrick was actually supportive of that project, and worked with another iconic movie star in that, Roy Scheider.
I love Roy Scheider. We haven't talked about Roy Scheider.
We should.
There's a connection to this movie.
Scheider cast?
Scheider, here it comes.
Every subject.
How esoteric of a movie star podcast do you guys want? Do you want us to talk about every episode of Sequest DSV, or are we going in a different direction? Schneidercast. We should do it. That would be confusing to people. My favorite Peter Hyams movie is probably The Presidio. That was a big My Dad and I movie growing up. Sean Connery. Is it Sean Connery?
Sean Connery again.
And
Mark Harmon.
Mark Harmon, who was an almost movie star before he kind of became a TV actor.
He's good in that. But I think he found Mark Harmon's acting style is so low key, that I think he works best for television, even though I think he has the chops and the charisma, and he's good looking and
good looking guy.
He's I think wasn't he like a quarterback at UCLA or something?
Probably. He gives off that sort of all-American vibe.
I think he was a star college football.
It's wild
player.
how many actors were football players.
Yeah.
It's a really tangential thing.
We're going in wild directions today. Let's get back on track. Get it?
Oh, look at you. That was a good segue. Phil's really getting good at the segues. It's really good. So I think, look, here's the thing. I hadn't seen this movie. If you haven't seen this movie, you should watch it. But also, this is a good deep dive into sort of the almost the immediate post Die Hard kind of milieu, the kind of movies that were made after Die Hard. And I think it's a really interesting movie to reflect on. And in my mind, an action movie, but a bunch of other things. But before we get there, Phil, you want to give us some fast facts about the film Narrow Margin?
Okay. Narrow Margin is a neo-noir action thriller that was released by TriStar in the US on September 21st, 1990, approximately 3 months after the release of Die Hard 2, Die Harder, which came out in July 2nd of that year. That was the last film that we did. And of course, we're tracking these films chronologically so that we can see the patterns as they evolve and mutate and adapt. Written, directed, and shot by Peter Hyams.
I love that he shot it.
Yeah, very
That's
unusual
so cool.
and a union nightmare, by the way. Like he talks about quite candidly on the commentary.
Oh, really? Yeah, because could he touch the camera? I bet he couldn't even touch the camera.
It's a whole, it's a very complicated process. I think Soderbergh does that too, but he does it under a pseudonym. I think it's become a little easier.
Oh,
but
I think Peter Andrews shoots all of Steven Soderbergh's movies.
Right. The great Peter Andrews.
I love Peter Andrews and
awesome.
Marianne Bernard. They're just both geniuses.
So it was produced by Jonathan A. Zimbert. It stars Gene Hackman,
Whoop, whoop.
Ann Archer, and James B. Sicking.
I'm going to take issue with your stars here because it also stars J.T. Walsh.
Oh, I was coming to J.T.
Yeah, J.T., my man.
I love...
Who doesn't love J.T.?
The Walsh.
This is a remake.
It's a remake of the 1952 film noir The Narrow Margin, which was directed by Richard Fleischer. We'll talk more about the film noir, which I've seen. So if you do have any...
I intended to watch this week, but I got caught up in life.
Yeah, I mean,
but you did.
I watched it. Yeah, so if that's perfect. So you can ask me if there's anything.
Phil
you're
lives in a
interested
cave and just watches action movies.
That's it, non-stop.
His family hasn't seen him in months.
It was made on an estimated budget of $15 million, and it grossed $10.9 million.
Kind of a flop.
Yeah, I think it probably did okay on home video.
Yeah.
And so I think it's sort of probably like at least would have broke even.
There was a real way.
It was a modest. If it was a success, I'd say it was probably a modest success box office wise, but I think it's a well-regarded film.
I think it's also probably to say that there were much more common ancillary ways to make your money back on a movie than including broadcast television, where I'm sure it played TBS, TNT, whatever channels in the US all the time. You mentioned ITV in the UK, and I'm sure it was a movie that got a lot. There was still a pathway for movies to get profitable, especially $15 million. But it's
you
not
had
an
more than one shot.
Movie.
Today it's kind of your opening weekend, and then that's.
Now Joel Silver was not directly involved with this movie.
No, Joel Silver had nothing to do with this. I'd say there's some we'll talk. Let's talk about the Die Hard DNA then, shall we?
Yeah, let's jump right into the Die Hard DNA. I'm into it. I like Die Hard. Do you?
Yeah, it's all right.
That's all right.
All right. So, yes. So this is a podcast about Die Hard.
Yeah. What does Die Hard on a Blank mean, Phil? For those for the 13 minutes in, should we explain what Die Hard on a Blank?
For the uninitiated, if you're coming in cold, yes. Die Hard on a Blank.
First of all, welcome.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
Coming in.
I'm Liam. Get comfortable.
Cable car.
Sit down. Put your feet up.
Yeah. Just relax.
Get into go to the food car. Get a beer.
Take your time.
Meet a mysterious woman sitting next to you.
So yes, this show is called Die Hard on a Blank because we're exploring the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, and this is an example of a movie that, in some respects, replicates the classic Die Hard formula of bad guys take over a blank, and it's up to one man or woman to stop them. I would say this is sort of a hybrid of Hitchcock and a Die Hard type scenario. In terms of and we'll talk more about some of those, I may as well do it now, and then we'll talk about the personnel, because really it's the premise that's more relevant than the personnel here, because
absolutely.
In this movie, we have a resourceful everyman hero, who is a assistant deputy DA played by Gene Hackman. We'll talk more about him in a moment, who plays cat and mouse with these murderous bad guys while trapped in a contained and claustrophobic environment. The movie, like Die Hard, also takes place almost entirely over a compressed timeline. During a single night.
One train ride that takes place overnight.
And
through the mountains of Canada.
Yeah, through the Canadian...
British Columbia, specifically.
The Canadian Rockies, which is essentially a beautiful wilderness. It relies heavily on suspense and tension based around the threat of discovery. And the other reason why I'm excited to talk about this, because, as I say, it's sort of a hybrid of it's in the classic tradition of train movies. There's Hitchcockian elements, but it feels like it's been updated for the post-Die Hard, post-Lethal Weapon. It has a sort of shot of adrenaline that's required for movies of that time. I don't think it could be as low-key as a straight Hitchcockian thriller in the post-Die Hard climate. So that's why I think it ups the ante on the action, especially in the first 30 minutes.
And I think I think Peter Hyams has some other interests besides action movies in this film. He clearly knows his film history, and in fact, as I understood it, saw the original film, the 1952 film, The Narrow Margin, on TV, and was like, that was pretty good. I want to make a new version of it.
And it's ripe for, it's certainly ripe for a remake. The original film noir is actually very short. So
it's like an hour 20, right?
Yeah, it's really, really, it's great. By the way,
is it good?
It's really good.
I should watch it. I imagine it's a little stagier and kind of like you would expect from a movie of that era, right?
Well, again, I mean, it's one of those rare. Some of these movies that you watch. I think that's from 1952.
1952.
Right? Some movies from that time can feel like they're a life, like just so detached from our current.
What do you mean?
Culture
People talking like
zeitgeist.
this?
Exactly. And then now and again, you'll see one that feels very contemporary. And I would say this one it's cool.
Yeah,
it's a legit cool movie. It's a cool vibe. Some of the differences are in that one. The main character is a cop. He is in this one. Gene Hackman is a lawyer, meaning to some extent he's sort of defanged. He doesn't have a gun. And he doesn't necessarily have the same resources. So that was one of the changes that they made. The other thing I wanted to just mention, though, about why I think this film is significant in the sort of canon of Die Hard on a Blank films, is that it's sort of started a subgenre or a mutation of that formula that was picked up by films such as Speed, Under Siege 2,
Dark Territory,
Under Siege 2, Dark Territory,
Eric Bogosian Forever.
Woo! And Unstoppable,
which is
an all-timer,
banger of a movie.
So some of the personnel connections to Die Hard are a little more, they're a bit more tangential, but they're still relevant. It was executive produced by Andrew Wagner and Mario Casar of Carolco Pictures.
Woo! Now that is a very nostalgic moment.
That
when
logo,
that logo
right?
comes up,
yeah.
And you kind of feel like when that logo comes up, I'm like, I'm in for a down and dirty action movie.
For
like
me, I associate
feel.
it with Terminator 2, which I watched a million times on video.
Pretty good movie, Terminator 2. It's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Sort of indifferent to it.
I don't know if it rocks.
It's like the most unbelievable sci-fi action movie of all time.
Pretty good. That Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's got a future.
Yeah, he's going to be fine. They also did First Blood, Red Heat, Total Recall, Cliffhanger, and Die Hard with a Vengeance.
They did Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Credits. One of them did. One of them wasn't on that. But
did they do Tango and Cash?
No.
It feels like they could have done Tango.
Peters and Goober, right?
Okay.
But they're probably they probably had a yeah, I get I see why you
It just feels like, Red Heat. Sometimes I think I confuse Red Heat and Tango and Cash because they have they have Schwarzenegger, right? But it's also like there's something about that era of VHS cases, late 80s, early 90s.
And in fact, to that point, our good friends at Clash of the Titles did a podcast where they compared or actually pitted against each other Red Heat and Tango and Cash.
Oh, I should listen to that one. I should go back into the archives and listen to that.
So check that out if you're interested in that. The other thing that I think is interesting is that Peter Hyams would go on to make a direct a Die Hard in a Stadium movie, Sudden Death, with Jean-Claude Van Damme. From 95, and he would also go on to make another sort of arguably a Die Hard on a blank movie called The Relic, which is Die Hard in a museum with a monster.
I like The Relic.
I like it too.
I remember reading the book, and then seeing the movie, and it's pretty gross. Tom Sizemore.
I could talk forever about that guy.
For me, the action is the juice.
Absolutely. And by the by, Penelope Ann Miller liked a tweet that I posted the other day, so I suddenly feel like
Penelope Ann Miller.
I felt legitimized by that.
Penelope Ann Miller. I like The Shadow, and I don't care who knows it.
Wow,
that was a big pandemic rewatch for me, and I was like, this movie.
Where are you on The Phantom?
I've never seen The Phantom, but I like a Billy.
I can't relate to those sort of 1930s style.
Oh no!
Although I do love Dick Tracy, but anyway, we're going wildly off track.
Would you please focus, Phil?
That's my Die Hard DNA done.
That was great, and I there's also a. We'll jump into this, but there's a moment in the movie, and I'm sure you can guess where it is, where all of a sudden it feels like the movie becomes a Joel Silver movie. That's like
for sure.
Really almost jarringly places the movie in its era. And I'll give you a little hint. It has to do with a machine gun and a helicopter.
Two of my favorite things in movies.
But before we get there, you do love a helicopter.
I do love a helicopter. Well, that was one of the things I was just going to, before we move into talking about the specifics of the movie. This movie takes place in amongst the great cinematic tradition of train movies that we talked about a little bit. Strangers on a Train, Runaway Train.
The Man Who Know Too Much, another Hitchcock movie that begins on a train.
movies we may do, such as Snowpiercer, Money Train, Source Code.
I really like Source
Bullet
Code.
Train.
Source Code is good.
Source Code's great.
Source Code's really good. Duncan Jones, good filmmaker.
Yeah.
I really, really like
Great
his
filmmaker.
films. Moon.
And going back to what we were saying before, is that Outland was a huge influence on Moon. On Duncan Jones' debut movie. So we know my feelings about helicopters. We know your feelings about submarines. Today we're going to talk about trains as an arena for mayhem. So should we talk about the premise of the movie?
Yeah, should we move into our section called
Yeah.
Anatomy of an Action Movie?
Let's
Very
do it.
quickly, according to our action movie expert, Phil Gawthorne, the characteristics that make up a good action movie. What do you have to have a good action movie?
So the sort of tenets that I came up with are the premise, the ticking clock, the hero, the villain, the action, and the humor. And it's actually proven as we're going through this process, sort of putting those parameters around it and analyzing films through that prism is quite enlightening, because you can kind of see, the idea of this whole thing is really Die Hard scores full marks in every category. Some movies that we're doing might score high marks in some categories but less in others, and as a result, there's sort of the overall feeling about it. That's the difference between a 3-star movie and a 5-star movie, like Die Hard, which is the bar,
And I actually, for this movie, I won't tell you what it is, but I have a 6th category that I would like to add occasionally for movies that I've been thinking about. So let's we're not going to go beat by beat through this movie. I think we're going to highlight some specific films. But would you like to give us a little sense of the premise of the movie? We talked about it briefly, but why don't you give us a quick rundown?
Right. So the premise of the movie is that the Los Angeles Deputy DA, Robert Caulfield, who's played by Gene Hackman, has to protect a murder witness called Carol Honeycutt, played by Ann Archer.
Woo woo! Ann Archer, love her. Sorry. Why am I heckling my co-host?
Calm down. As they travel through the Canadian wilderness on an overnight passenger train. Unfortunately, this said train also contains 2 ruthless underworld hitmen who will stop at nothing to kill her. So that's the kind of the basic setup.
Here's the thing that's interesting about this movie, and you said it was a neo-noir.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, from my point of view, if I can give my sort of genre breakdown, the first 20 minutes of this movie feel like a John Grisham novel. Ann Archer playing
sort
Carol
of in the
Haneke.
legal world.
Yeah, she goes and meets
corridors of lawyers' offices.
Right.
Yeah.
She goes to meet a man for a blind date at a hotel,
right,
in LA. They're both very convincing in terms of the awkwardness of the first date, and he gets a note on their first date, which is going pretty well. They're enjoying a drink before their dinner, and they go upstairs together. And to Peter Hyams' credit, he doesn't sort of short shrift the emotional connections. He makes you believe in them as people. And she goes upstairs with him, and there's this awkward moment where he's like, I got a call. I'm sorry. I know it's weird, but I have to go upstairs and call my client. And so she goes upstairs with him, and she's in the bathroom. And he calls his client, who does not answer. And then his client, whose name is?
Leo Watts.
Leo Watts, played by?
The amazing Harris Yulin.
Harris Yulin from Ghostbusters 2, baby. Comes in and murders J.T. Walsh's lawyer character. Right. And all of a sudden, it still feels like a Grisham movie, because then we move into, as you said, Lawyerville and that element. And so and then in the midpoint of the movie, it sort of becomes an action movie for a while. And then it really leans into the noir elements, which we can talk about. But I think the most effective part of this movie is the screenplay, because I think it's not that it's not a well-made movie, but Peter Hyams is clearly like a student of cinema, loves film noir, is also kind of leaning into the sort of predates the legal thriller that would become the sort of action legal thriller that would become popular with the Firm and some other films that'll come out later on. It's a little bit of a
the lawyer
precursor.
as hero, or the lawyer as action hero, that the Firm sort of walked that line a little bit.
And you still occasionally see movies like that that kind of come out with, they might not be outright action films, but they have a thriller element, like the Matthew McConaughey film from the Lincoln Lawyer. Just this kind of for lack of a better word, summer fiction that you would read. This movie begins kind of like a beach book. Yeah. And then it becomes an outright action movie. Yeah. Throughout.
Especially towards the end. And what you're saying is, well, there was a quote from Hyams that I love where he said that there's a kind of film that I lust after, which is a grown-up thriller.
Yes.
And I thought that was sort of quite a concise and succinct definition of what this is. And this was a year, and I think we talked about this on one of the other shows, where Presumed Innocent was one of the biggest hits. Box office hits.
I'm a big fan of
the
Presumed Innocent. I think
it's
a very strong
Bonnie
movie.
Bedelia, from a little film called Die Hard.
I've heard of it.
But it does speak to the we're just in a different era where courtroom dramas could pack out the theaters.
Well, now it would be a TV show.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it too. Which, not to get all like movies used to be better, but I do miss the adult thriller. Yes. Getting the release in movie theaters that you can go and see.
Those relationships at the beginning do feel like they're not kids. They're both, I think, divorcees or, middle-aged people. And it's very real. And I think, again, like Die Hard, Die Hard, we forget, there's about 35 minutes before any action.
Right.
They spend a lot of
good
time setting up the characters so that setting up the relationships, setting up the emotional stakes in Die Hard, which is, that this relationship is sort of hanging by a thread with his wife. Can it be repaired? We're invested in that for both of them. We like them. They've got kids who we meet. All of those kind of things that make the world feel textured and real. And then we're more, emotionally invested in what happens to these characters.
And to put it another way, in some ways, this feels like a movie that could actually happen. And I think what's great about action movies of this era is that, whatever percentage of the movie feels like real life, and then there's the flights into action fantasy with helicopters and people driving inexplicably through the woods without wrecking their cars or diving out a window without bleeding or any of the there's sort of flights of insanity, but there's a lot of the movie. I wrote one of my notes that I took is this kind of a movie about sad middle-aged people who only have their work going on in their lives.
Because there's another character that comes in that's sort of a slightly sad divorcee character, and it's almost a lot of the characters are older. I mean, we're going to talk about when we get to
Hackman was 60.
Hackman was 60 years old,
and Ann Archer was like 43.
Right?
Yeah, and I took
kids,
note of that. They're not kids, and it's something I appreciate about the movie because they're not. They look like Gene Hackman has never looked like what you would consider a quote unquote movie star. It's really interesting. Again, it's an era when the actors were they looked a little more like real people.
Yeah, it makes
right?
them more relatable.
Yeah.
They don't have to be on the cover of Men's Health with their abs out.
Like us.
Yeah.
By the way, that's coming out next
They're always
month.
hassling me to go on the cover, and I'm like, guys.
It's actually Men's
Leave
Podcaster. That's the name of the magazine. Yeah. Phil and I just lifting our shirts up.
That would have very low circulation.
How dare you? Speak for yourself. So that's the plot. Look, we could go forever, but this I think the thing that's interesting is simple plot, but really nuanced, varied texture to this movie. And I think that it's genres. It straddles genres.
And to your point about the screenplay, again, listening to the commentary, one of the things that really impressed me about Hyams' approach was he would have like everybody look at the screenplay and be like, where's the plot holes so that I can plug them.
Oh, that's
so that
great.
Everything was very well thought through. Why can't they get off the train? Well, this is the reason why. Why can't they call the cops in such and such a moment? Why can't he kind of figured out all of those parameters so that everything was very logical and tight, and you don't have to, there was just no mistakes, I think, in that sense. And that's why I think it's a very tight, economical screenplay.
And it's only a 99-minute movie or something like that, which is really
lean.
It's lean. Yeah, it's lean.
Doesn't overstay its welcome.
And that's because it has a ticking clock that's moving the story forward. So the ticking clock
you should bring that up, Liam.
I am on the cover of Men's Podcaster this month, but it does.
An IPA in hand, the chunky jumper.
How dare you? I don't drink IPAs. The ticking clock is the thing that's propelling and pushing the story forward. So what is the ticking clock for?
For narrow margin. So basically, just to lead into that slightly, so when Caulfield is trying to track down this character Carol Hunnicutt, who's witnessed the murder at the hands or the direction of Harris Yulin's mobster character. So against the order of his boss, Caulfield takes a detective called Benty, who's played by the amazing Emma Walsh, who we will revere at length later. They take a helicopter to Carol's remote cabin in the Canadian wilderness, and they're hoping to convince her to testify and bring her back to LA. She refuses, and that's when the helicopter assault comes in.
This one it becomes a Joel Silver movie.
Yeah, for about 15 minutes, it's a straight up Lethal Weapon 2
pretty
style.
striking sequence, very well directed,
brilliantly filmed, brilliantly edited. Large again. almost all in camera, apart from a tiny bit of model work.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a strong sense of continuity to the way they're cut going down the mountain that I think is really impressive. Not a lot of not a lot of, I should say, shots inside the car, like a lot more of the car.
Yeah.
It's like a battle between machines, like a helicopter and a car going.
And there's a desperation to it that's really great, and because this it's just something that was thrust upon them.
You love a helicopter. I have a picture of you sort of getting into your bed with your footy pajamas on. You're like, good night. And you press a button and it's just soundtracks of helicopters with machine guns going up and you're immediately asleep.
It's not a million miles away from the truth.
And your wife is like...
My poor wife, I insist, once, this is inside baseball, but every year around my birthday week, I insist that we watch Red Heat and fall asleep to it. That's how weird I am.
You're a man.
How I'm still married, I don't know. But it takes me back to that. It just sort of, how in The Big Lebowski, the dude plays those like the sound of bowling pins being knocked down on his Walkman. That's me, but with helicopters and James Horner's score and people being shot and Arnold going, "I have my orders." And it just soothes me into Bobo land.
Yeah, absolutely. I just listen to recordings of us talk when I fall asleep.
So basically, after this desperate chase, Benty the M. Emmett Walsh character is killed in this assault. So Caulfield and Carol flee, and they seek solace on a passing train. However, the two hitmen track them down. They board the same train, which sets up the ticking clock, which is: can Caulfield and Carol survive the night, outwit the determined assassins, and make it back to civilization before these hitmen?
They're headed for Vancouver, lovely city. I don't know if I'd want to be hunted there, but it's a nice place. It's a nice place to visit. Yeah, I mean, and I think there's, to Peter Hames's credit, there's only so many places you can hide on a train.
Yeah,
and I don't think the movie does this, but I think at a certain point one could stretch believability in terms of how well she's able to stay hidden, and he does a good job of moving her around the train. At one point she hides in the bathroom, at one point she hides in the closet of the room she's in. Like, it does a nice job of making you feel as though they're missing her. And also it does something very, very smart, which might be an interesting lead into our next category, where finally at about the hour mark of the movie, maybe a little earlier, Hackman has to confront these two assassins who are on the train looking for him.
And in my opinion, this scene, so there's a character...
It's a great scene.
It's Heat-esque.
It is Heat.
Legit,
very good,
right?
Yeah.
And this is a scene that I really wanted to talk about because I think it's the best scene in the movie. So basically what happens is this character played by James B. Sicking.
James B. Sicking, just wonderful in this movie. I don't know. I can't think of a single other thing I've seen him in, but he's
a Hyams regular. He casts him a lot.
Hyams cast? Should we Hyams cast?
Yes. Give me all of them.
His son is a filmmaker.
Yeah, and he's making a name for himself.
Yeah, he has a new film called Sick.
He's doing really well. He cut his teeth doing a bunch of Universal Soldier sequels,
which are apparently amazing.
Quite elevated.
We should, Regeneration, Universal Soldier podcast.
Yeah,
Universal podcast.
Van Damme cast. Now that's we're kind of doing that anyway.
We should probably slow down on the. I mean, we're already doing Iguana Cast.
Yeah, Iguana Cast is taking up a lot of my time as it is.
I get so many calls from iguanas asking, "Can they come on?"
Come on the show.
Yeah, exactly.
Jub is like hitting me up nonstop.
He's had a tough run. That behind the okay, wow, we're off track here.
So
focus.
So this character. So basically, James B. Sicking is the enforcer for the mobster character, and there's this wonderful scene that's probably about 2/3 into the movie, so it's sort of a key point structurally, where he confronts Hackman and they sit down in the sort of what would you call, like the cafeteria, the cafe car of the train.
Love a cafe car.
And have a drink and basically talk about the situation. And it's an amazing scene because it's almost like a timeout from the conflict. And it's like, let's talk.
Well, it's kind of a negotiation.
Well, he's trying to bribe him.
Yeah,
right?
essentially.
So, but there's also an element of it's relaxed because there's people around. But at the same time, it has that Heat type feel of like when the first time you watch Heat, there's always that feeling of maybe one of them's going to pull a gun out from under the table kind of thing,
Yeah.
And
brother,
they're
you are going down.
Should we just annoy everyone by just trying, like, badly recreating that heat?
I will not hesitate.
Conversation in the cafe. Don't worry, we're not going to do that. Stay with us. It's an incredible scene, and I think with a couple of years ago, he played at one of the theaters.
Yeah,
it
got a big rep screening all around because it's something like the 30th, or it's coming up on a long time since it came out.
I went to see it for the first time on the big screen before I'd since I saw it when it came out. Michael Mann was there afterwards, and there was a Q&A, and it was awesome. But what struck me about seeing the movie on the big screen was the sort of micro expressions between De Niro and Pacino are magnified in a way that you don't experience quite the same way at home. And this is similar because it's two master actors who are the scene has conflict. It has dramatic tension. It has a goal because Jim Sicking's intention is, I'm trying to bribe this lawyer to basically point out the witness because they don't want to know what she looks like, and look the other way. And he makes a very compelling offer. He said, that's all you have to do, and we will give you 10 times your salary to do that. You'll never earn this money again in your life. You don't have to do anything, and then
you can even
kill
pretend. He says you can even pretend
make
to
a show
save
of protecting her. And he makes
cynical.
It's so great because he makes such a compelling case.
Seductive.
Yeah. And he's very sort of affable.
Yeah.
And he's very, like, reasonable in this moment, even though we know that this guy is a stone cold killer.
Well, he's kind of like the devil.
Yeah.
And not to, like, there's this interesting sort of, like, pick from the tree of, that kind of thing is interesting because
a temptation element.
I made a joke later, but Peter Hames, one of his last big films, I would say, is End of Days, the movie where Arnold Schwarzenegger fights the devil as personified by Gabriel Byrne. So, like, obviously this is not religious in any sense, but there's this sort of moment where they sit down. It's like, look, let me make this easy on you. One of my favorite things about that scene, a couple things. One is it's also man-esque in that there's that moment of like, look, you're a professional. I'm a professional. Yeah. We're being professional about this. And he has a goon who's like the hitman who actually does the hits with him. And Hackman just gives him shit the whole time. Like he turns to him at one point. He's like, he's trying to make a deal with me. And like, only Hackman would do that delivery that way, and it's really great. But there's something seductive about it. I love that. I love that he orders a 7 and 7, which is
What is that?
It is a whiskey and 7-Up.
Okay.
And the other guy orders a Scotch.
Is Jack Daniels?
It's Jack Daniels.
Number
yeah,
7?
Yeah.
Because when I watched it again, I was like, what is that? 7
it's a Jack Daniels, right? And Hackman orders a coffee.
Yeah,
which I think is also interesting in terms of the character. It's very telling. Little details.
I'm on the clock. I'm staying sharp. Whereas the other guy, I'm relaxing.
Well, they probably think they're gangsters. They're probably like money cures all problems, right? This feels like the moment to talk about the next category, the hero.
Yes. So, interestingly, Gene Hackman's character of Robert Caulfield does share a number of McClane-style characteristics.
McClane-esque.
On face value, totally different. He's a 60-year-old DA, whereas McClane is a 35-year-old, detective. But they do share, there's actually a lot of common ground. They both have no respect for authority. Or rules or bureaucracy.
Very specific kind of authority, but yeah.
Hackman goes against
like
his boss, and his boss is sort of he's trying to tie him up. He literally says, "Last time you put me in your bureaucratic blender, and he got away, and you're trying to do it to me again." So he kind of cuts through that red tape. He's very wily and resourceful. He's a great improviser and bullshitter. Note the scene where Anne Archer's character pretends to be pregnant in order to get the private compartment. He immediately picks up the cue, and it's very Mamet, that type of scene, like the sort of subtle con.
That's good. The House of Games,
House of Games, totally. Or Glengarry. Like when someone's a slick con person and the other person's like hip,
right?
So they kind of get.
That's a good connection I hadn't made.
They pick it up pretty quickly. He's also got strong detective skills, even though he's not a cop. There's a couple of little moments, like when they get to the cabin, he feels the engine of the truck and goes, "It's warm," meaning like it's been driven recently. She's probably home. Things like that.
I don't think I picked up on that, but that's smart.
He also notes that the train is slowing down when they're trying to get on it, meaning there must be a stop coming up soon. Things like that just show this guy is smart.
Yeah, he is smart. He's resourceful.
In the way that McClane is similar in that sense.
One thing I would say, though, is there are moments where, especially filtered through the lens of Anne Archer's character, is that he is a little hapless, and she always feels like, you're not doing that good of a job. And I like that as an approach because this is a film noir. And one thing that he does not pick up on in the entire film is that there's this woman showing an interest in him on the train.
Yeah.
And they sit together and they talk, and it seems as though she's flirting with him. If there's a femme fatale character, the film noir thing, it's this woman. Yep. And what's interesting is there's also this like sort of portly, chubby detective fellow who he thinks is an accomplice of these two murderers, these two gangster murderer assassin types. And he mistakenly identifies this guy as their third, but it's actually the woman. And I think Peter Hyams sort of calls on the classic sort of like male protagonist being sort of flummoxed or caught off guard by a femme fatale character that's really rewarding at the end of the train, because there's a reveal where she's on the roof of the train and this woman has a gun. And Ann Archer and Hackman are both taken aback by it. And to be fair, I kind of didn't see it coming. I mean, I sort of should have. He sort of telecasts that this woman has something to do with the story, but she's so convincingly performed. And to Hackman's credit, he seems so distracted by what's going on the train. He never picks up on like, why is this woman talking to me?
It's brilliant. And one of the other things that underpins that Hyams talked about, and this also speaks to like the underpinnings of Die Hard, which I'm connecting it to what you're saying. McTiernan, we didn't ever actually talk about this, but his quote unquote secret melody for Die Hard was A Midsummer Night's Dream. And the thinking behind that was that it was a festival night where the princes become asses and the asses become princes, in his words, right?
That's so great.
Incredible, right? Now, it's interesting when you think about Die Hard in that way, because you do see that the high-status characters are humbled and vice versa. Now,
Midnight Summers cast?
Please stop. Please stop. Okay.
You're like, I'm drawing a line.
So
yes, but you're right. There's a reversal.
So where I'm going with this is what Hyams said that his intention with this film was something very specifically was the characters you think are good end up being bad, and the characters you think are bad end up being good. And that was a very deliberate decision for the underpinnings of the kind of this twist-laden story where you don't know who to trust, because there's a scene where, for example, and we don't want to, maybe you should stop with if you are going to watch the film,
consider this a
here,
spoiler warning.
There are going to be some spoilers.
It's also from literally the year of 1990. So if you haven't seen it by this is your problem.
Get on it.
Not my issue.
But there's a scene where, for example, there's two Canadian policemen that turn up that are supposed to help them, and that scene also had echoes of the Bill Clay Battle of Wits, because Caulfield uses police jargon to test them. And
what does he say? Something about
I think I've got them on a 314.
Which is a decent exposure, but they think
they go with it because they're fake. So he exposes their duplicity. So also, like McClane, he doesn't like flying in the helicopter scene. He's complaining about it to Emma Walsh. It goes on and on.
My favorite element of this character, to come back to it a little bit, is his sort of like thinking on his feet, trying to be resourceful, but never quite being all the way successful.
Yeah.
And this is the moment where I would like to recommend two Gene Hackman movies from the 1970s. One of which is pretty well known, and the other is less well known, but is an absolute masterpiece. The first one is the film The Conversation, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, which, in my hot take coming, I think is the best movie Francis Ford Coppola ever made. And I just think it's unbelievable. It's about a sound recordist who sort of becomes obsessed with a conversation in which he records, and after the case, two people die. He gets sort of embroiled in a conspiracy. There are long sequences of the film where he's sort of listening to the tape again and again and again. He's being followed. He's being watched. He's sort of like, slowly descending into madness. And all, by the way, sort of put upon by a young pre-Star Wars Harrison Ford. It's just a great, great movie. Pretty well known and pretty popular and absolutely worth seeing. The second is the film Night Moves, directed by Arthur Penn. Have you seen Night Moves?
I haven't. I'm all over The Conversation, but Night Moves is one of the ones that's been on my list, and you should. Well, so a couple things about Night Moves. But he plays a private detective in L.A. who gets sent to find a missing girl. Sold.
Yeah, 100%. And then the case gets more complicated and more intriguing throughout. And it's if he's a little buttoned up in Narrow Margin and very buttoned up in The Conversation, playing sort of like very stilted characters in some ways. I mean, The Conversation is like borderline, like he's really extreme in terms of his, social skills. I would say in this film, he's a little bit better and a little funnier. Night Moves, he's kind of just a prick who doesn't give a shit at the beginning, kind of has a lot of opinions, and by the end is sort of decimated by what happens to him. It is a phenomenal movie. He enjoyed a relationship with Arthur Penn. They made a bunch of movies together, and Arthur Penn cast Gene Hackman in his first movie, Bonnie and Clyde, which is a classic, and probably when he was in his 40s, right? He was
and
a late
really
bloomer.
What sort of put him on the map, right?
Totally.
Bonnie and Clyde, right?
Yeah, no, it was his first movie, which is amazing. And, just a bunch of other great performances. This is a guy who also
can't go wrong.
played Lex Luthor.
Hackman cast I will sign up for sure.
Stop, please
After we do Iguana cast.
Stop it. And of course, we'll probably be we're going to talk about him a couple times, but one of my favorite late career Hackmans is...
became this elder statesman action star.
Crimson Tide.
Yeah.
Ugh, unbelievable. And Enemy of the State, which is potentially an unofficial sequel to The Conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you like Tony Scott? I'm just kidding.
Just a bit.
Just a bit.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
So there's a Conversation and Night Moves. Check them out.
Just to cap off the point about Hackman, as well as I think the other part of his brilliance is his gift for comedy,
right?
And his light touch and his playfulness. That is also slightly like Bruce Willis had that quality as well. He could play. He's in a serious situation with high stakes, but he also had that nimble ability to infuse scenes with humor. There's one particular, just so we may as well cover the humor bit real quick while we're on that before talking about the villain. But there's a moment where, and this sounds a bit sort of silly and a bit slapsticky, but it's fairly well set up. Out of desperation, Hackman ends up taking a kid's water pistol, which, by the way, is a Beretta 9mm.
McClane's gun, Martin Riggs' gun,
right, which we talked about before.
Timothy Dalton's gun in License to Kill. I'm not a gun guy.
No, we're not. It's just.
But it's just
purely
ubiquitous
within the context of movies.
It was ubiquitous within the.
It was the iconic weapon of this time. But there's a moment where, also, by the way, a lot of the foreign posters used Hackman holding the Beretta, so it was very much Die Hard imagery.
Real quick aside,
we might post one.
You know what I love is an action hero uncomfortable with guns.
Yes,
I think Richard Dean Anderson as MacGyver never used a gun. I always thought it was great when he'd have a gun. He clearly wasn't comfortable holding it. It's kind of, it's kind of a cool touch when you have a character who's kind of like, I want nothing to do with a gun. Yeah,
totally. And in this scene, they play with it in an interesting way because he's holding a water pistol that looks convincing, but it's powerless, right? But Chaim said that there's a little moment where he's holding it, and it's like a moment of crisis deep into the third act. And he pulls the trigger, and the water comes out.
The bubbles come out. Or it's water. That's right.
And Chaim said on the commentary that was Hackman's idea. So those are the kind of moments that are of like giving that's the kind of thing that could go wrong and just deflate the movie. But Hackman is so brilliant.
I laughed out loud.
Yeah, those moments are great. So he has a real, his comedic sensibilities are exploited well here, as well as his dramatic.
A real penchant
skills.
for comedy. He's a great, 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 great actor. Yeah, for sure.
Should we talk about the villains?
Let's talk about the villains. I think we've covered a lot with Wooten and Nelson, who are the two assassin villains. So they're, Nelson in particular, very cunning, very savvy. Wooten kind of the sort of sidekick. So let's devote a minute here to Watts.
Yeah.
Played by Harris Yulin.
Harris Yulin, and I was watching it again this morning, and the bit where the door opens and you see Harris Yulin's face right at the beginning. I imagine how terrifying it would be to open any door and see Harris Yulin. He's so intimidating.
Yeah, he's such a great actor. He's kind of a guy that you've seen in a million things. Like I can remember from Ghostbusters 2. What other films has he been in?
Scarface, where he plays Mel Bernstein, the scuzzy corrupt narcotics cop.
Right.
Training Day has a great cameo in that.
Oh man, he is in
he's
Training
one of the
Day.
three wise men.
That is a
Tom
great
Berenger
scene.
And Raymond J. Barry as like these sort of really
Berenger cast.
Sniper, I love.
Yeah,
Can I confess that?
Yeah,
I
no,
love
it's okay.
Sniper.
It's okay.
I love Berenger. I think
Yeah.
he's actually one of the great kind of underrated actors of that
I love
time.
him in Inception. Such a cool
Yes.
choice.
Yeah,
Such
yeah.
a cool
He's
choice to put him in the movie.
So great in that. And
Yeah.
Betrayed, I love that. If you're interested in political thrillers, to your point, I'll recommend Betrayed from 1988, Costa Gavras, where he plays a Klansman who's been investigated by Deborah Winger from the FBI.
Okay.
He's undercover. It's a great movie.
Stop. Costa Gavras pod. 100%.
Finally, we cracked it.
Yes, we figured it out. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Yulin is great because he's intimidating from the go, but he's not physically violent. He's a much closer to a Gruber than a Carl.
And he has a call.
Yeah, he has a Carl in Wooten.
In Wooten, yeah.
Yeah, and he's just and you know, it's interesting that you have three. You have Watts, the big boss. He's only in 2 scenes of the movie.
Yeah.
He only has lines in one of those 2 scenes. He barely has any screen time with Hackman, which is really, really
a
cool.
long shadow because he's such a strong actor.
Right, for sure. And I just it's great. I mean,
Yeah.
10 no notes, Peter Ames.
The only other thing I was just going to say about Nelson is somewhat unusually. There's a shot when this is the Jim Sicking character there's the helicopter attack, and we haven't seen them at that point. We just know there's a helicopter attacking them. And then when he arrives at the train station, there's a shot where Hyams pans up from his boots,
White boots,
all the way up. He's wearing like a cream suit, pulls off shooting glasses that are like those orange tinted things for like better, superior vision. And to me, it's like he looks like a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's got this bushy beard, he's got bushy eyebrows. He looks like he's like a predator,
or like a Wall Street guy a little bit on some level.
It's just it's cool that it's unusual. He takes a moment to be like, and this is the bad guy, and it's just like
the heel reveal or whatever you want to call it. It
just kind of like buttons it in a way where we're like, okay, cool. And Sicking's actually quite a big guy, and apparently
tall.
I think Hyams said he was I think it was like a water polo like Olympic level or something like that. He's quite an athletic
all these actors
guy.
from the 70s, 80s, and 90s who
Yeah,
were like, I also had a second career. Like Kurt
yeah.
Russell was almost played baseball, right?
Yeah,
For
yeah.
sure. You know who, to call to mind a later McTiernan film, you know who he reminds me of? Charles Dance in Last Action Hero.
Yes, very much. Yes, totally. Even down to the suit. I think.
The suit. Well, that's kind of what it is. It's the beard and the suit.
gentlemanly manner. But,
but a psycho,
yeah,
like a psychopath.
Sinister. Yeah. He's great.
Great, and great to see 2 actors get to dig into the meat of it in that scene that we referenced before. I'm also a big fan of the villains having a drink in a movie. I like that. I like that they're like slightly buzzed throughout the film. I don't know what that says about me.
The other thing, though, it's important about that scene, I think, from the screenwriting and structural standpoint. We talked about this with some of the other examples, but sometimes with these Die Hard on a Blank scenarios, they have the issue of the hero and the villain on in the same physical space.
Yes.
So anytime you can get them to meet, it's often your best scene, as it is in this movie, as it is in Heat, as it is in the Bill Clay scene in Die Hard, and so on and so forth. Like Crimson Tide, for example. I mean, think about that. Like the scenes where you get these 2 incredible actors to go at it, like it's like a boxing.
Can we do
match,
Crimson Tide now? Like, can we just change the
chomping at the bit?
Oh, it's such a good movie. The action. So this film, a bit more of a cat and mouse kind of thriller than an outright action movie.
It's mostly pretty low key, apart from the beginning and the end. The helicopter assault at the beginning, which I think is really, really great.
We kind of talked about it's
we
great,
talked about
great,
that.
strong.
Well, it's
strong.
a great action. It's a really, really great action
and
sequence.
it's extended. It's not quick. It's probably 8 to 10 minutes.
High production value.
I was literally about to say. I think that when you're sort of in the know about these things, it's really crazy to watch it and be like, holy shit! Like they really pulled something off with this sequence.
It's a really, really great sequence. And then the other thing that I think that's significant about the action is the finale, which you mentioned earlier, where they've had to get on top of the train. They've sort of run out of places to hide. There's another assassin who is after them. This Hackman and Archer on top of the train, and again, that was all a lot of that's in camera. There's 1 or 2 shots that might be like a process shot.
Can you explain what in camera means?
So in camera means they are actually doing it in the physical space where they're shooting
really
it,
happening,
as opposed to on a stage with computer generated
backdrop
imagery or
visual,
backdrops or whatever. So they're actually on, and Hackman, 60-year-old man, is climbing on board a train that is actually moving. And you feel it, you feel the authenticity of it.
Proto Ethan Hunt.
Yeah, and Speed.
Keanu?
He makes the same line, basically the same joke, which is like Hackman says, "You know what I like about you? You're tall."
Right.
Boom, gets hit by.
And in Speed, Dennis Hopper loses his head because Keanu Reeves holds him up. Oh, it's so gross.
Says, "I'm smarter than you," and then Keanu says, "Yeah, well,
but I'm taller. Keanu,
Yay!
the best king. Yeah, it's the action works. I think the best thing about the action in this movie is it's functional, it's to the point. There's also a scene in the film where Hackman dives out the window of a bathroom when he's off the train that I think is just shocking in how visceral it is and just very effective. But again, the action never oversells itself. It works really, really well. Love a fight on the roof of a train.
Yeah,
as preposterous, but you believe it's happening. You really, really
what I also
do.
really like in that moment is that Anne Archer has a bit where she's like, I can't do it. I'm scared. And Hackman, I think, says something like, "So am I, but we have to do it anyway," kind of thing. And it's just those little touches of human realism. They're not, so they haven't suddenly become superheroes. You know, they're two desperate, scared people kind of doing their best, which is again a little bit like McClane.
Yeah, and the improvisation to survive. This is the moment where I want to bring up my sixth category.
Yes, please.
Now I don't know what the name of this should be, but I'm going to call it The Lady.
Okay.
Because I think Anne Archer has Bonnie Bedelia and Die Hard vibes in this movie. She's resourceful. She's smart. She gets out of the situation. You know, she's kind of critical of Gene Hackman. Like, she doesn't just accept, and she's certainly not a damsel in distress, right? I think she's not given as much agency per se in the movie as we'd like her to, but I like that she pushes back, and I think it's when possible, it's good to explore kind of like, you know, as we're exploring the hero, it's kind of interesting to explore like the in the case of this, the woman who's in distress, who like kind of fights back and is not predictably always exactly, you know, just like, help me. I really appreciate about this performance. And I think if someone were to remake Narrow Margin in 2022, here's what I want to have happen. Caulfield and M. Emmett Walsh show up at the cabin to persuade her to go, and they're immediately both blown away by, you know, the Nelson and Wooten, and the Carol is on her own and she gets on the train. I think that would be so cool to kind of see, like, I'm on my own, and then she could befriend someone on the train. Like, there's a version of this where there's, as great as Hackman is, there's no Hackman. And I think that could be like a very, very cool kind of take on the
there's
movie.
also some great, there's one scene in particular where Anne Archer is really given the space to shine. And again, I think this is Haim's gift and
the sort of monologue bit.
She does a speech where she basically said, like, towards, in the second half of the movie, because Hackman's on her case the whole time, like, you have to testify. And she doesn't want to testify, understandably, because she's scared. And eventually she says, look, I have a son. This isn't just about me.
Yeah.
And it's a
I haven't seen him in a month or whatever it is.
Beautifully acted scene.
She's a good actress.
You know, she's great.
She'll be
She's
back.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, if you think about this, you know, you're a screenwriter. If you think about this from sort of a dramaturgical perspective, the character who changes over the course of this movie, and so therefore, in some ways, the main character is her, going from fear to resolve to testify, and, you know, because she knows it's the right thing to do.
It's quietly heroic, you know.
It is quietly heroic.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think a lot of the time, some of these movies kind of have the problem of the woman in distress, but I appreciate that Haim's strong dramatists, like McTiernan, strong dramatists, do not make these characters sort of like, you know, weeping willows or sort of an interesting thing to announce.
And Hackman's kind of a fuck up. The whole thing is Hackman's fault. Like, he brought those hitmen to her. He
really screws up. And it's a film noir thing, by the way, for sure.
He's totally flawed and makes mistakes. And for the first sort of 40 minutes, it's all his fault. And he's just scrambling to try and figure it out. So
which makes for good action. I think a perfect action hero does not make for a good action movie.
Totally. Yeah. You have to have a little bit of grit in the oyster.
Oh, wait. Do you hear that? It sounds like the theme music for the Die Hard Awards.
Should we get the tuxes on?
Get them on. Mullet back on. Let me just adjust the mullet.
Bit of hairspray.
Just button it up. We need to come up with theme music to make that a little more bearable. Let's do the awards.
All right. So our first award is...
These are the Die Hard themed Oscars, the Action Movie Awards.
Yes. Our first is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Quip.
I have it. What are the nominees? I'm so sorry. I jumped on. I'm a terrible scene. I'm a terrible scene partner for this.
Right.
What are your nominees?
There aren't a ton. There was one bit that sort of had slight shades of Commando, where Harris Yulin is pretending that he's going to leave J.T. Walsh, and he's like, "Oh, it's okay," and I'm not, I'd never harm you, and then he turns back and goes, "Oh, Michael,
I lied. Right.
Which is hard to say and not to say, I'm going to kill you lastly, and do that whole
That's pretty
bit,
good. You do a passable
It's
Schwartz.
horrible. It's
It's fine. Hey, buddy, it's a Schwartzcast. Oh my God. I need to be cut off. I'm sorry.
Kill the mic.
Yeah. This conversation is over.
The other one, two others. Just a great bit of Emmett Walsh being Emmett Walsh.
You have any beer?
Where he said, and she says, "Aren't you on duty?" And he says, "I only drink when I'm on duty."
I love it. So good.
Just like, man, you're awesome. And there was one other line that I liked from our guy Keller, who was the Portly Railroad agent, who I wanted, if we get a second, take a moment to just give some love to.
Maybe he's a scene stealer.
He has a line where he says, "Nobody loves a fat man except his grocer." And that's actually in the film noir. That's one of the few lines.
It's a great line.
It's a really endearing line. And then later when he's actually, because the guy ends up being, well, I'll just talk about him now for a second while I'm on this, because, so this actor.
Kellercast. Welcome to Kellercast.
Now just listen to this. This actor who plays the Portly Railroad agent, who ends up being quite brave and competent, and he's in a couple of scenes with Gene Hackman, one of the ultimate icons of cinema. He is named B.A. Smitty Smith. That is what he is credited as.
That's my ex-birth name. That's what I was named when I was born.
B.A. Smitty Smith, who plays this character. Now, he only has 2 credits on his IMDb, the other being a TV series called Danger Bay, in which he appeared in 1 episode. He passed away in 2013. So I want to give Smitty some love, because I think it's a lovely performance, and it's a great payoff to that bit, because later Hackman says, like, it's not just your grocer that loves you, when he is actually helping them out, and it's just one of those moments where, like, is anyone ever going to talk about Smitty on a podcast?
It's also human. It's a very human thing.
And I genuinely think he's great in this movie. And this is probably the biggest thing he's ever done. And he holds his own against Hackman. And shout out to Smitty.
I love that. Now that that very nice moment is over, you missed the best quip in the entire movie.
Hit me.
Television cameras are something of an aphrodisiac for you.
Oh, yeah.
Which Hackman says to his boss, which I just think is like delivered in like Hackman-esque perfect.
Hackman.
I know that television cameras are something of an aphrodisiac. He's a slight little laugh, and it's. I think that from I literally paused the movie and wrote that down because I just thought it was very, very strong. But I do like the fat man in his
for
first
Smitty.
role.
Do it for Smitty.
He wins.
Win
Smitty,
one for the Gipper.
Smitty, we love you. Thank you for your work. Also, in the grand tradition of undercover officer on plane helping the heroes, a la Executive Decision and a bunch of other films. The Sky Marshal, whose name escapes me, but is a great character actor as well.
Right. Our next, sorry.
Jeez, I keep interrupting you. The Hans, one of my New Year's resolutions was to interrupt less, and I'm failing. The Hans Gruber Master Thief Award for stealing the film.
Now, this one is stacked. So, nominees... I put Anne Archer, but technically she's one of the leads. So
I don't think we can give it to her.
The rules of this should be, I think, anybody except the lead.
Okay.
Sicking, James B. Sicking as Nelson, Emmett Walsh as Detective Sergeant Benty, Harris Yulin as Leo Watts, and Susan Hogan as the charming yet ultimately treacherous Catherine Weller. She's the
who's your
blonde,
pick?
Divorcee. Sicking all day.
I'm going to go with the divorcee.
Really?
Yeah, I just think it's such a smart choice, and it left me kind of flummoxed and sort of like going back and forth throughout the film. I will say, interestingly, I watched this film the other night, and my wife watched a lot of it too. And I think that is a real sort of like point of pride for. She's not a big action movie person, but she really sat and kind of was like, what's going on here? Like, what is this movie? And I think that part with that divorcee character who kind of like, who is she? What's her deal? There's a moment where she passes Hackman getting on the train. She looks at him and like, I just think it's very smart casting. She's very good. She's unassuming, and it's sort of, I don't know how old Peter Hyams when he made this movie, but there's a little bit of thematic sort of middle-aged stuff in this movie set against the backdrop of an action noir. And I think it's very strong, but I totally support your choice of Sicking. I think he's wonderful in the movie. I would love to like a Sicking cast. No, I'd like to see more movies that he could do.
Yeah, check out Outland. If you're it's awesome. The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie.
Well, who are the nominees?
And our nominees are Nigel Bennett as the cold-blooded hitman Jack Wooten.
Oh, good.
Kevin McNulty as the double-dealing prosecutor Dahlbeck.
Dahlbeck is such a bastard name.
And J.T. Walsh as embezzling lawyer and worst blind date ever, Michael Tarlow.
First of all, J.T. Walsh, wonderful. Rest in peace. Great actor.
Gone too soon.
Probably going to talk about him in some other films as well. I know The Negotiator.
Totally. Could you just to digress on this for a second? Could you imagine in the world of movies if you went to a blind date and it was J.T. Walsh?
I'd be worried.
Run.
Yeah, get out of there.
Because all that's coming for you is evil and venality and corruption.
Great
and
actor.
oh gosh, do you have a favorite J.T. Walsh performance? Because he's amazing.
I don't know. I'd really have to think. I mean, I think he's incredible in A Few Good Men, there's two people in A Few Good Men in this movie. The judge is Hackman's boss, whose name escapes me. Yep. And J.T. Walsh. I think he's phenomenal, and I think he gives off this man of...
J.A. Preston,
wonderful. Yeah. J.T. Walsh gives off a man of duty kind of a vibe in every film he gives, and it's heartbreaking in A Few Good Men. And it's actually heartbreaking. I give him credit. The way he approaches the scene and dying is really touching. Like, I think he really like cries like a baby. Like, it's not a vain performance.
No,
which is really impressive.
It's something that J.T. Walsh would do quite often. He's usually cast as some kind of sleazy businessman or
borderline heavy occasionally,
or just some kind of like powerful scumbag who's like morally corrupt, right? But sometimes he will let us into his soul a little bit, like in that scene, or a little bit in A Few Good Men. There's also a movie. Just speaking of the noir thing, to give people another recommendation. There's a wonderful film neo-noir called Red Rock West with Nicolas Cage and Dennis Hopper.
That showed at the New Beverly over the summer before we recorded this.
It's impossible to find.
It's hard to get.
It's one of my favorite J.T. Walsh moments of acting where he's this scumbag, he's trying to kill his wife in the classic noir tradition, and he's in like a Mexican standoff with Dennis Hopper, who's trying to sneak up on him, and there's just a bit where he loses his cool and he's like, "Stop moving!" And it's just like
that's really good.
It's just when he loses his shit. It's great. So, I love J.T. Walsh, man. So for me, he's the winner.
I don't think he can be the best dick, though, because I don't think he's a dick. I feel bad for him.
Well, he has stolen money from the mob, and he's put Ann Archer in a pretty bad situation. Although he's weirdly likable in the film.
So likable. And yeah, I don't know. I felt bad for him. So my pick would be Wooten or Emmett Walsh. It's just kind of a dick. You got any beer? What?
It's like first thing in the morning.
We're like literally escaping. Yeah. I love the alcoholic cop character actor bit that guy does.
It's one of the Walshes for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Ooh, good. We've settled on two possible Walshes for this part.
They can share it.
Best death.
Michael Tarlow's hotel room murder. There's not a lot of them.
Yeah.
There's Jack Wooten and Nelson being thrown off the train, and there's Catherine Weller's implied decapitation via tunnel.
I'm going to go with Catherine Weller's implied decapitation via tunnel.
Yeah,
it feels like getting cut in half.
It's the most memorable moment. It's actually not particularly violent film, which sometimes is nice.
Yeah, Well, it's kind of cat and mouse, kind of a thriller. It's psychological. It works really, really well. Okay.
Now, unfortunately, you've stepped on most of my Double Jeopardy trivia.
Oh, but then all means let's do them.
But I'll give you one.
It's all names of random podcasts that I've come up with.
Because one of them was going to be which member of the narrow margin cast would go on to appear in the Die Hard in a police station action movie, The Negotiator.
Oh, J.T. Walsh.
You just mentioned. And we'll do this one just for completion's sake. But actually, let's forget
No, do it. I want it.
All right.
I want it.
All right. Because then this will make you feel good because you already know the answer. In fact, you've already said it. Later in the 1990s, Gene Hackman starred in two iconic action movies directed by the legendary Tony Scott. Can you name them?
This is a tough one. Crimson Tide and Enemy of the State.
Yes, and the great Tony Scott also made not one but two terrific action movies that revolved around trains. Taking a Pelham 123 remake, which I love, and Unstoppable. Two films we'll be covering on our
Unstoppable might have my favorite first 45 minutes of any movie ever made.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Total masterpiece.
There is one last question that you haven't mentioned. Let's see if you get this one. Two members of the narrow margin cast also appear in the 1994 Jack Ryan action thriller Clear and Present Danger. Can you name them?
Well, Ann Archer, Clear and Present Danger. Oh my God, I just watched it. I watched it the day my son was born. If you can believe it. Yeah, I was
I'm busy, honey.
Yeah, sorry, I'll talk to you later. Harris Yulin.
Yes,
Yeah, Harris
correct.
Yulin plays the slimy Department of Defense guy.
National Security
He's
Advisor
so
James
good
Cotter.
in Clear and Present Danger.
Yeah.
He's so good. He's kind of like the Gruber to Henry Czerny's sort of foot soldier.
Oh, I love
the greatest hacking scene in one of the greatest hacking scenes in movie history. Computer
so
theft,
90s.
Jack.
So 90s.
Yeah, it's great.
This is my autographed get out of jail card.
Oh my god, he's so good.
Czerny cast?
One hundo.
All right, so
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
So-
Enough's enough. Okay, I gotta stop.
just bad Henry Czerny impressions cast.
Oh my god.
All right, rating the movie. Where does this fit in the action movie tradition? How does it compare to Die Hard? Any final thoughts?
I don't think it's a particularly like quote unquote important action movie, but I think it is a testament to the time and the focus of people in the era making these kinds of movies that are beyond competent, beyond well produced, and just like absolutely so rewatchable and elevated. It's nothing. It's not disposable. It's we make the joke like, oh, you watch these movies hungover on a Sunday. This is like a Tuesday night movie when you're like kind of have a little of your faculties left and like you want to go on an adventure. Like Peter Hyams knows his Hollywood history. He's smart. I think it's a legit. Like I texted you, I think it's kind of a banger. I think it's kind of a great movie.
I think Hyams is like a much better filmmaker than he is. Like his reputation would suggest, because he sort of had he had a tough late 1990s, and
who didn't?
And then Sound of Thunder kind of just put the nail in the coffin. And I don't think that a lot of that was his fault, or is it like the money fell through and but he's made some really, really great films. And I think this is just a classy adult thriller that, like you say, you could watch pretty much in any mood. It doesn't demand much of you, but it's intelligent at the same time.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
it's full of twists and turns and great actors across the board.
Absolutely. I think that about does it.
Yeah.
But a few things before we go. Please, if you have not, subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choosing. If you really love us, you'll go and rate the show on Spotify or Apple. And if you really, really, really love us, you'll review the show on Apple Podcasts. Look, helps the show, helps it continue to be in the top film and TV, movie review, film history podcasts on various platforms. We're getting a very welcoming, nice response, and we want that to continue. So please, rate, review, subscribe. But most importantly, do you have a friend? I don't. But do you have a friend, besides Phil,
I used to.
that loves Die Hard and action movies? Tell them about the show. I had a coworker tell me that her boyfriend loves this podcast because he was like, finally, a Die Hard-esque podcast. Now, I'm sure there have been others, but nobody's doing it like we're doing it, baby. So please, tell a friend. Tell somebody. If you have a question for us, you can reach out. I'm at Liam G. Billingham on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm just at Philip Gawthorne on Twitter.
You can reach out there. You can add us at a comment, whatever you want. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. You can also email us with your comments and questions or a voice memo at diehardoab@gmail.com. If it's a good question, if it's a good comment, if we have time to address it, we will talk about it on the show. Mailbag.
Love it.
So let us know what you think of the films that we're talking about. Tag us on any of these platforms. This will also be in the show notes.
Great.
Phil,
Yes.
what's next on the show?
Next is a movie called...
So it's a movie, good.
Yeah, it's a movie for a change. It's a movie called Toy Soldiers from 1991, which was really the first Die Hard on a Blank movie outside of the Die Hard sequels. Like straight up Die Hard ripoff? Homage?
Homage.
To be discussed, to be debated.
discussed.
So
Well,
join us for that episode.
I look forward to it. I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm Philip Gawthorne.
We will be back with some new FBI guys, I guess. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast hosted and written by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Please rate, review, and subscribe and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Special thanks to Suki Chu and the whole team at Sugar 23. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.